Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Friday's edition of Take 5. All week long, well, for the past 2 weeks, we've been talking about distinguishing God's voice, recognizing it above all the other sounds and voices that are competing for our attention. And for the last couple of days, we've been using Isaac and his two sons, Jacob and Esau, to try to learn a little lesson from them there. Now, I realize Isaac and Jacob was not the voice of God, and that was the voice that Isaac was listening to. I realize that, but we can learn some things from that, because if Isaac would have listened to the voice and trusted the voice that he was hearing, he would have known that it was Jacob instead of trusting what he felt and what he smelled and what he thought. And so we've talked about two mistakes that he made. Number one, he gave in to the pressure of time. And sometimes we do that. We get in such a hurry. We think we got to move now. We think this must be God. We've got to move now. And God doesn't operate in time like we do. And number two, he gave into presumptuous progress. He assumed because things seem to be going so well that this must be God. And we know that's just not always the case. We got two to talk about today, so let's hurry up and get both of these before we run out of time. Number three is personal preference. Personal preference is the idea that says what I am hearing and doing must be the voice of God because the conditions are pleasing to me. The conditions fit my life. We say things like this as though God always works his divine plan around our comfort and our present. And truth be known, most of the time God's plan doesn't work that way. The importance is to hear the voice of God and obey him without factoring in our personal preference like Isaac did. Isaac wanted to bless Esau because he was his firstborn, and as we know, if you've read the story, he was his favorite. He was his pick of the litter, as it were. And so he wanted it. This was his personal preference. And I'm going to tell you something. Much like Isaac did that, sometimes we can want things so badly that we tend to think we've heard God speak when it's actually only our personal desires. A lot of people wanted someone so badly in a relationship that they just pushed forward. They thought God said, hey, this is the one for you. And they end up getting what they thought they wanted. But then when they get what they thought they wanted, they end up not wanting what they got. Because they didn't hear God and they followed this idea of personal preference. People can also have personal preferences when it concerns who they hear something from. Sometimes people like someone, a particular preacher or speaker so much, and they have so much confidence in them that they'll just do anything they say because of who they are, whether it be a friend or just a speaker, a preacher that you just really think highly of. Everything you hear, everything somebody tells you that when they say it's of God, you need to fact check it by the Word of God. We hear a lot of that here lately with politics and social media and so many other things, but you need to fact check it by the Word of God. So that's personal preference. Number four, and the last thing that we're going to cover that represent the mistakes Isaac made and some of the mistakes we make when listening for the voice of God is tradition. Hebrew tradition said that the firstborn was to receive the blessing and the inheritance. But now God had spoken earlier that the younger is going to rule over the older. God is going to break tradition. But it couldn't be that way with Isaac. Isaac said, there's no way. We got to follow tradition. We've got to do it like it always has been done. God has got to speak to me. Things have got to go in accordance like they always have. Many times people will limit the voice of God to what they have experienced in the past, what they've seen or heard, but we cannot afford to limit God to particular experiences and traditions only. All power, all knowledge, it all rests with God. His grace and His love and His wisdom and power are all multifaceted and multi-layered and complex and immeasurable. Why in the world would we ever think that just because He did something or spoke a certain way one time that He's going to do the same thing every time? You know, Elijah would have still been sitting in that cave in Oreb if he'd have been waiting for God to speak like he always had. He found out he wasn't in the wind, he wasn't in the earthquake, he wasn't in the fire, but he came to Elijah this time with a still small voice. Same thing with the Apostle Paul. None of the letters that he wrote, the epistles that he wrote to the New Testament churches, would have been written if Paul would have been waiting on God to speak to him like he did on the Damascus road, you know, and knock him off his horse and shine a bright light on him and blind him and speak audibly to him. None of the Bible that Paul wrote would have been written if he'd have been sitting around waiting. Well, I'm waiting on God to speak to me. I believe I'll go get my horse and ride down the road, see if God will knock me off of it. That's just so silly to limit God to that. And a lot of people do that. They limit him to particular traditions, the way they've heard him in the past and the way they've seen something out of him in the past, instead of opening up their heart, opening up their mind, opening up their spirit, and saying, Lord, speak to me however you need to speak to me. I want to hear you. With Isaac, it was the same way. Everything that he felt, everything that he smelled, everything that he thought there told him that this was Esau. But he should have listened to the voice that was talking to him, telling him the whole time it was Jacob. You know, when you read about Isaac's life, you'll see that he was an outstanding man. He was a great man. He was a mighty man. Abimelech and the Philistines came to make a treaty with him because they feared him. Because he was such a patient and peace-loving man, but he was also very prominent and very powerful, and the Philistines didn't want anything to do with him. But in this passage, dealing with his two sons, Genesis 25 and 27, I believe it is, he reveals the weakness of his flesh. As powerful and prominent as he is, the whole nation of the Philistines feared him. But as powerful as he was, he gave into the weakness of his flesh by giving in to those four things that we discussed instead of listening to the voice that he should have known so well. What do you say, friend? Let's don't let that be us. Let's know the voice of God. Remember what Jesus said in John. He said that his sheep know his voice, and a stranger they will not follow. And we are to know him just like he knows the Father. So what do you say? Let's work on this thing. Let's deny our flesh. Let's put it aside. Let's be spirit-minded and spirit-led and not spirit-filled and carnal-minded. And let's hear the voice of God when he speaks to us, because I'm telling you, he wants to be involved in every single part of your life. He's talking to you. If you'll just listen, God will speak to you and help you make every decision you need to make. Hey, I've got to get out of here. It's been good being with you. I look forward to worshiping with you on Sunday and then being right back here again as we start a brand new series of Take 5 devotions on Monday. Until then, God bless you. Have a great weekend. Hey, trust the Lord, my friend. He will never fail you.